call it the dilemma of a nation, and you may not be far from the truth. Nigeria, for most part of the last decade, has been dealing with violent extremism and terrorism at a high level, leading to several national, regional, and international collaborations working to end these strategic attacks. With the relocation of the military command to Maiduguri, the epicenter of Boko Haram insurgency in 2015, a great level of success was recorded. Now, the federal government in 2017 also developed a national action plan to holistically address the challenge. The price has been too high to pay and the pain too deep to bear. On Nigeria today, countering terrorism and violent extremism is our focus. I am Joy Osiago. Good evening. With me in the studio to look at the issue today is Father Atta Barkindo, Director, Kuka Center. Father, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Joy.
All right, let's start this way. How best can one describe violent extremism?
I mean, first of all, we look at the concept extremism. A lot of us are very extreme beliefs. Take, for example, football fans. They are very fanatical, they are extreme in their views about their own, football legends, football players that they really support. Sometimes they don't even see anything wrong with those football players. And that type of extremism can turn out to be violent when you want to use aggression, when you want to use violence, physical force in order to achieve what you actually believe in. It could be ideological, it could be political, it could be religious or even territorial. And that is what we call violent extremism. And a lot of terrorist organizations actually imbibe that when they have these extreme ideological beliefs and extend it to the fact that, these beliefs, we have to use violence or whatever means to achieve what we want to achieve. This is violent extremism.
Now, there's this notion in terrorism and counter-terrorism that says one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. I mean, how do we differentiate between what we have right now, whether it is freedom fighting or terrorism?
Yeah, if you look through history, for example, there was time Mandela and the ANC in South Africa were described as terrorists. But eventually they became freedom fighters, for a lot of people. And I think that certainly in certain societies, people that have genuine grievances and all channels of opposition and expressing those grievances have been blocked. Some people sometimes are actually forced, even for very good reasons, to take up arms, resistance and rebellions in order, to achieve the purposes and the agenda that they have. But in the context of terrorism, that is really different. In the sense that these people have an ideology and a religious belief. And therefore, even if there are political channels of negotiations, they don't want it. Because the political system in itself is considered an infidel system. So it's not going to be accepted. So therefore, there is no any other way of achieving this except through the belief system that they have. And that is why that kind of a belief system is really very, very dangerous. Now, if somebody says, my religion is superior to yours, the political arrangement, political authority, everything has to be based on this certain belief. And I'm not going to negotiate with politicians. I'm not going to negotiate even with the constitutional system. Will you now say that person is actually patriotic, even if he's fighting on behalf of certain number of people? Particularly if those people he's fighting for are not critical, are not educated, cannot sit down and critically think through what their leaders tell them. Because sometimes when the leaders speak, it's as if these are pages that are dropping from heaven. And therefore, these people just swallow everything, hook, line, and sinker. And I think that is why it is very difficult to say, those who lead this type of movements, are they really patriotic? It's difficult to say.
Now, looking at our own context and our own scenario, you find out that the federal government is always trying to go into negotiation with these terrorists to see if they can get those who are in captives back. We've noticed a particular pattern and trend. They get some people back, and the terrorists go back to get more people. So where do they stand in terms of these definitions you've given?
I think that
how do you describe them?
It's not fair to suggest that all that the government has been doing is to negotiate with groups like Boko Haram or even Ansar, for example. The government has actually done a lot beyond some of these back channel hidden negotiations that most times there are all sorts of narratives, but there's no evidence. People have not actually come out to give us the real details of some of these negotiations. But of course, we have seen massive military offensive since 2009. The police have been deployed, the military has been deployed, civilian JTF. In certain cases, they even use local hunters. So we have seen this level of, military offensive that has taken place. Of course, as you mentioned, these little political negotiations here and there. But I think, as you mentioned at the beginning of the program, we have also seen the action plan launched by the Office of the National Security Advisor. And this program started way back during Jonathan's administration, when they drafted the de-radicalization programs in prison. Then the military eventually opened Operation Safe Corridor. And I think that, to be fair to the efforts of the government and even the military, a lot of things, have been done in order to counter violent extremism in this country. But the biggest challenge is how collectively as Nigerians we can take ownership of this problem, domesticate this problem, and accept that, look, we have a serious problem on our hands. How can we come together as a country and as a nation to address this problem?
All right, I'll still come back to this issue of collective participation in the fight against terrorism and violent extremism. Since you talked about government's national action plan, let me look a bit deeper into that. It is patterned after that of Switzerland. Now, looking at our local situation here, can we say that that pattern of approach will work for us?
It's difficult to say until it is implemented over time. Then the impact is assessed and evaluated. It has worked in other countries like Singapore, for example. I personally did a training on de-radicalization for 6 months in Singapore at one of their universities. Although it's not a very good comparable case, in the sense that Singapore is a smaller country where even some of the insurgents, when they are arrested, they are brought face to face with their children, with their family, and this family contact has a huge impact, and there's a sudden change. And some of them have turned out to be very good business people. So I think that when we try to develop that of Nigeria, I remember we studied that of Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Singapore, and other countries, and we came together, selected as a team by the European Union to put down a de-radicalization guide. And the radicalization guide, of course, had 3 components, as I explained in the morning. We have the counter-radicalization to attend to the socio-economic needs of communities, so that in the first place, people are not radicalized. Then you have the de-radicalization, which targets those who are already radicalized and have carried out violent atrocities, particularly those who are sentenced and convicted. So they are given the opportunity to go through certain, trauma counseling and all that in order to change their behavior and attitudes. And the other one is strategic communication in order to counter these extremist ideologies that litter northern Nigeria in our schools, our mosques, our churches, and all these sorts of things. And I think what the Office of the National Security Advisors has done now is to take that model and see how they can include other government agencies, in trying to play what role they can assist and support. So, for example, if a Boko Haram member is arrested and is convicted and sentenced to 15 years, will he just stay in prison for these 15 years and do nothing? Or within the prison and these 15 years, could he be offered the opportunity to go to school? Can he study from the prison? So if he could study from the prison, what can the Ministry of Education do to assist him? If he has health challenges, what could the Ministry of Health do, to assist? If eventually they are going to leave the prisons and go back into local communities, What could the Ministry of Women Affairs, for example, assist women, children in terms of community engagement and eventual reinsertion back into the communities? So I think that that document clearly and comprehensively captures not just what institutions like the prison service can do, but eventually what other MDAs, all these government agencies, and how they can come together to play their role. And I think that is what I was talking about, that collective coordination.
You're still talking about collective approach to solving this matter. Now, you have talked a lot about the content of that document. Now, are we practicalizing it? If not, what is the problem?
The document has just been launched, and I think eventually it will be implemented. And you know, in implementing it, you have to undergo a lot of community needs assessment, community engagement. There has to be lots of coordination. But one key important issue is also about capacity training for those who are actually going to implement that program. So for example, if the program has a component on Operation Safe Corridor, and some people will be released to Operation Safe Corridor to stay there, do you have experts on trauma counseling? Do you have experts who can handle children? Do you have experts who can carry out risk analysis again and again to assess the threat that these people have against the community, against the society? Do you have experts who can engage with the communities, consult religious leaders and traditional rulers, and prepare even their families for eventual reintegration? These things don't work in a day. So you have to find the money, the resources to train people to have this capacity in order to handle, you know, these problems. It's not fair to say, as some people will imagine, that these people have committed serious crimes. Just line 10,000 people up and kill them. It's just not fair, because the processes of arresting some of these people, sometimes there are no evidences, and that is why the military carries out what is called classification, to understand their level of ideological commitment to the group. So if someone is a hardcore ideologue, serious hardcore ideologue, who has committed very serious crimes, he will now be sent to, you know, face the law and go through the court process. But someone who probably is passing by, or who rented out his house to a Boko Haram member and didn't even know that this guy is a Boko Haram member, and then is arrested alongside, what evidence do you have against him? Can you now classify him and determine whether he's low risk, and then allow him to go through the trauma process of counseling and then reinsert him back? So we have a lot to do, and it's not going to take just one day. There has to be serious community assessment and training in terms of capacity development.
Now, it's obvious that the federal government is doing a lot nationally, and they've also engaged international bodies to see how they can fight terrorism in Nigeria. And yet, we still have more horrible stories coming out. What exactly are we not doing right?
I think that we have too much concentrated on the perpetrators. That is one. And then number two, we have not as a nation tried to really understand what Boko Haram is. At the beginning, the mistake we made was when this group emerged, all we thought that these are poverty-stricken, ignorant fanatics who actually do not know anything. I studied Arabic as a Catholic priest and Islam in Egypt for 2 years. In my class, I had some American students who after 2 months, they left because of how difficult Arabic is. But when you find the leaders of Boko Haram, they are not only able to speak the Arabic, although it may not be as classical as theologically oriented Arabic of the Quran may be, but they are able to speak it, they are able to translate it into Kanuri, into Hausa, and they are able to eloquently attract, you know, their followers. And we have not sat down to really study this group. And at the same time, when you are carrying out violent extremism programs, you just don't concentrate on the perpetrators and the victims. You have to understand the context. That is the socio-economic problems of the Northeast. It has been a region marginalized for decades. So while you are trying to attend to the perpetrators, you are trying to attend to the victims, could there be some kind of a Marshall Plan in order to help resuscitate and reconstruct and revitalize both agriculture and everything, that so that the young men who are jobless, who litter the land can have something to do, and they do not find belonging and identity within groups like Boko Haram. So these have to be done hand in hand. You can't do one aspect and leave the other.
All right, Father, so I will still continue on the socio-economic context. You're on to Nigeria today, and we've been looking at countering terrorism and violent extremism. We'll take a break now. The program continues shortly.
Coming up on NTA News 24, Nigeria Today, 7:30, Monday to Friday, with exciting anchors on topical issues. Inspirators, a search for those who inspire others. Business 24, a business magazine program. Late edition repackaged. Fresh and exciting programming on NTA News 24. Stay with us.
Thanks for staying with us. Father Atta, let's now look at the communities, the areas. It was once Maiduguri, and now we're talking about Dapchi. What should we take note of, especially our security agencies, in terms of the area, the location, and the people and their ways of life?
When I was doing my PhD at SOAS in London, one of the things I did with my thesis was to collect the YouTube videos, some of the books and leaflets written by Boko Haram leaders, and I tried to translate them, and I assembled a team that actually helped me with the translation. And what I came across, and very seriously, is not so much our Islamic ideology, although it is a significant component, but another thing is the manner and way these people are able to exploit colonial history. You have to remember that before Nigeria became a country, the whole of this Kanem Borno empire was a flourishing Islamic empire. They controlled trans-Saharan trade routes. They were in diplomatic relationship with the empires in Tunisia, in Morocco, in Libya, and even in Egypt. They built schools and sent their students. I remember coming across one of the documents in Arewa House in Kaduna, where a poet was sent by the Caliph in Kanem Borno to Spain, in Andalusia, to sing for the Sultan. So when Boko Haram leaders recall this history, they talk about how flourishing that empire was, and how that empire was dismembered, just fragmented, by the colonial masters, and divided into Niger, into Chad, into northern Cameroon and Nigeria. And for decades, the communication in those areas remained. People cross over from Maiduguri into Niger, into Chad. There's intermarriage, there's fishing union, there's farming unions. All these networks exist. Because for you to take a car from Maiduguri and come to Abuja, it's easier for you to cross over and enter Chad or enter Niger. And they know the area, they speak the same language, they belong mostly to the same religion, and that is why recruiting from those areas is very, very easy. But at the same time, they also depended on Lake Chad for agriculture, for fishing, for animal husbandry, and for so many other things. If you look at in 1963, and today is 2018, that lake has completely declined. The lake is shrinking. And somebody said that probably in 10 years' time, the lake will disappear. So the people have lost their farms. So that is why kidnapping, smuggling, and all these things become very, very easy at that border area.
In other words, there's a challenge with the means of livelihood.
Absolutely. So what will happen is that there has to be greater regional cooperation between those countries. And then they have to seek for international assistance, not only in terms of technical support to revive the lake, but also to revive agriculture. And that is where environmental security, also comes in. Replanting the trees, making the land work again for everyone, so that both men, human beings and animals can actually survive, in that place. Because the land is vast. Remember, Borno State alone, territorially, somebody says it's more than almost 3 states or 4 states in the south. How do you control in terms of security that kind of a territory?
So what can the federal and state government do to change this negative narrative?
First of all, I think the government has to engage more with the communities, the owners of the land, give them the impression, or at least appreciate the fact that their views matter, consultation matter. And then the government who has to attend the socio-economic really needs of people. But another key area is education, particularly girl child education and empowering lots of women. They say when you empower one woman, you build a whole nation. So, and I think that these are some of the issues, you know, the government has to attend to.
All right, let's look at the issue of international intelligence. You have noticed that after Boko Haram, we've seen so many other groups coming out and even getting bolder. So in terms of international intelligence, what do we have at our disposal? How are we doing in that area?
Anyway, I wouldn't like to go too deep into that, but I know that there are lots and lots of cooperation between Niger, between Cameroon. They share some, you know, level of intelligence, but it's not enough to share information. It's actually what you do with that information, you know, that matters. If you remember the guest in the morning who mentioned the fact that even the security services were informed that it's likely these people could come and kidnap. So it's not having the information, it's about what you actually do with that information. So this problem is not only in Nigeria. Look at the recent shooting in Florida, you know, in the US. There were rumors that, of course, the police officer who was in charge should resign because the man who carried out the killing had been reported several times, both to the FBI, and nothing happened. So you have these little weaknesses once in a while within the security services. So sharing of intelligence, yeah, is happening. But what do you do in order, you know, to follow up and to ensure that this type of things do not happen? But I think that one other thing is that intelligence too is becoming really very expensive. You also have to dwell so much on the internet now, using lots of technology. And therefore, I think in that aspect, we have to really train our military, train our security services, probably give them the best and even the latest, you know, technological gadgets. If you go around our areas, you come around lots of military checkpoints, police checkpoints. What sort of mobile phone and communications gadget will you find them with?
All right, let's look at the communities. You know, this morning we had our correspondent via Skype from Dakchi, and he was talking about information, rich information he got from the people within the community. Now, what should our security agencies do in terms of, you know, liaising with communities, especially in areas that are prone to this attack for information?
Around my area, around Adama and even some parts of Taraba, I have come across lots of security, members of the security services like the military, even police, who don't speak the languages of those areas. But they are manning security checkpoints on the road. So this issue of federal character, we deploy you from your own state of origin to a state where you are not of origin because we want to. In a security situation like this, we really have to take certain, you know, elements into consideration. It's like Americans landing in Afghanistan and suddenly they discover they can't speak Pashtun. How do they gather the intelligence? If they have to depend on an interpreter, the interpreter can lead them to an enemy line. So gathering the intelligence, we have to get security forces who really can speak the language, who understand the history, the culture of that place. That makes it much easier, you know, for them. But I think that at the same time, the security services too will have to be really motivated. Part of my research was to visit some of the police barracks, military barracks in Taraba, in places like Seriti, at the border area. If you come and see the living conditions of the military, it's deplorable. It's appalling, completely unacceptable in this 2018. So to what extent will you take a military man living in that condition and you send him to give his life for this country? How motivated will he be?
All right, quickly, let's touch on the issue of funding. We know that they're fueling these terrorist groups internationally from research and from the things we know. What should our government be doing to find out the source of funding for this group?
If you look at Al-Qaeda, Islamic State, you don't need to go far to really understand their sources of funding. When Islamic State captured some of the oil fields, both in Iraq and Syria, they were selling the oil, they were making money. When Boko Haram attacked Mubi and other places, they go into the banks, they are able to take money, they kidnap. When they are trying, probably the government is negotiating to rescue the girls, rescue lecturers. We have no idea how much the government went back behind to pay. So there are all sources of making money. And let me tell you, some of these terrorists, especially Islamic State, they are not stupid. They know what it means to put $10 million in a fixed deposit in a bank. They know what they can get. Al-Qaeda knows what it means to sell gold and to trade in golds and do other things. So these people are very, very sophisticated. If you look at Islamic State, their monthly magazine, which is called Dabiq, a little town in Syria, which is called Dabiq. If you look at the sophistication, the quality of English that is written, English language that is written in that magazine, and the magazine is translated from English into Arabic, into Russian, into Chinese. And so they know their targets and they know the audience they want to reach. So these people, in terms of funding and other things, they really know how to get their money. And you know, today, the government really has to sit up to really know how to block the banks, how monies are transferred, mobile money, internet, and all those sorts of things.
All right,
yes.
for that, I want to thank you very much for coming into our studios and your wealth of knowledge.
Thank you so much.
That's been the program for today. We have been looking at countering terrorism and violent extremism in Nigeria. My name is Joy Usiagu. Join us tomorrow, same time, for another discussion. Have a good evening.